Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala habibina al-Mustafa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome viewers to our new podcast, Pathways to Prosperity, with me, Ameen Hassen, where we'll be covering a variety of topics over the coming weeks, inshallah. To start off with though, there's a verse of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. They come to you, O Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The Sahaba Ikram used to come to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam and ask him about the moon or the phases of the moon. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam to respond, قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. It is a means of calculating time for mankind, wal-hajj, and when is Hajj. And alhamdulillah, we are entering into the days of Hajj. Most of our Hujjaj have already departed. The last few flights will take place over the next few days. And so we're going to be covering this topic of Hajj. More importantly, this verse of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. And it is an obligation for us to make Hajj to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا, for those who are able to do it. Now, ability comes in different forms: psychological ability, emotional ability, physical ability, and financial ability. And I'm grateful that we've got today one of the board members of SAHUC, Mr. Shaheen Essop, and we're going to have a conversation around the costs of Hajj, some of the considerations that our Hujjaj need to take into account. Mr. Shaheen, I've been doing a little bit of research, and the average package across all of the different accredited operators, middle of the way, not too extravagant, not too strenuous or lower end of the market. It's about 150,000 rand. And now you put that into perspective for the normal working class man, 150,000 rand is a far-fetched away. Give us an overview. What drives these high costs for Hajj?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Jazakallah khairan, Ameen, for having me on the show today. You've touched on a very, very specific nerve, and that is istita'ah. Istita'ah is very important from a perspective of decision making when it comes to Hajj. And yes, whilst you talk about the abilities and everything else, the financial ability forms part of that equation. One needs to understand the financial ability, and always during the Hajj period, we find people coming and sharing with you, Hajj in 1956 or 1965, 300 rands or 500 rands or 1500 rands. But the one thing that the public out there fails to understand is that as time goes on, the aspect of inflation creeps into every aspect relating to costs, whether it be in South Africa, whether it be in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, we're just going to digress for a second, and we're going to go prior to COVID. Prior to COVID, packages between, let's call it 2015 and 2019, were between 35, 40 and maybe 90,000 rand for an upper echelon package. That in itself, was as a result of different dynamics in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The cost of fuel was still quite low. The cost of fuel today is 2 riyals and 35 halalas. Back then it was 33 halalas a litre. You're looking at taxes that were basically inculcated by the Saudi government, and those municipal taxes and VAT and various other taxes all contribute towards, the supply chain of a package that needs to be done. Over and above that, you also find that post-COVID, we've had a privatization of Hajj in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, when we talk about privatization of Hajj, the Mutawif or the Muassasa used to be an affiliate or a direct substructure of the Ministry of Hajj and Umrah in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now they're private companies. And these private companies all have a board who have put money into their, processes, and they want a return on investment. You're a banker, you understand that. And as a result of this, it's escalated the cost. Just prior to COVID, 2019, the cost of the 5 days in non-special services was 2,550 riyals. If you look today, it's 5,000 riyals. It's a 100% increase. But what exacerbates that problem for South Africans is the dire state of our economy, the inflationary processes we find ourselves in, and the worst, unfortunately, is the rand-dollar exchange rate. our rand dollar exchange rate from 2015 down to 2019 hovered between 3.4 or 3.9 reals or even 4 reals to 4 rands to a real, whereas today it's north of 5 rands to a real. So that in itself is a massive expense. Operators will have to pay for their costs in reals, the hotel accommodation and various others, and unfortunately that is passed on to the end consumer, and hence it becomes a factored problem in terms of the cost increases. Post-COVID was one other factor that is quite considerable, and that is the international airlines that come in and out of South Africa. The frequency of these international airlines. Some airline companies are charging north of 30,000 rand for an economy class ticket. That used to be between 12 and 15,000 rand, pre-COVID time. So these are all factors that are outside of the influence, or static factors, as you want to call it, that we don't have any control over.
Uncle Shane, I actually had a chat to one of the operators last year. Alhamdulillah, I went for Hajj last year. And he said very clearly, he said, listen, we don't even make margin on Hajj. And as you've articulated, it's mostly macroeconomic factors that are coming into play. For the person that has applied on the waiting list or thinking about applying, typically, what would a package include?
It depends entirely on the operator, if the operator wants to include airline or not. But generally, all operators exclude airline.
Okay.
So it's all ground services that you're basically getting covered. Your 5 days of Hajj is covered, in the non-special services. Anybody who wants to go to special services will pay an additional amount. And let me just digress for 10 seconds. In the past, we used to have quite a big number of people that used to go to additional services camps. Now, we've only got 43 this year, out of the 2,500.
No, last year it was like almost 80,000 rand for special services.
Well, it's exactly the same this year as well. So there's no difference in terms of that costing. But you've got to ask yourself the question, is it really worthwhile? Because ultimately, 2 days you're not going to be there. You're going to be there for the day of Tarwiyah. The next day you're going to Arafah. You come back, you're going to perform your, Rami of Jamaratul Aqaba. Then you're going to perform Tawaf Ziyarah. Most of that day is gone. So effectively, 2 or 3 days is what you're spending 80,000 rands for. There's no real, economic viability to it. In jest, somebody asked me one day and they said, what's the difference, between the non-special and the special? I said, well, the closer you get to the shaitan, the more money you waste. So we need to understand from a perspective of where we're going and what we're doing. The vast majority of people in this country, unfortunately, have put their names on the list. And that is, an 8 to 10 year waiting list. Unfortunately, COVID has put us back a little bit. And as a result of which, people don't save. The only time they start scurrying for money is once they get that accreditation SMS. Now, 6 months or 9 months prior to that, SAHUC is already putting out what we call a dynamic list. Now, anyone within the queuing numbers of 1 to 2,500 should indicate to himself or herself that we are going to be accredited. Failing, anything outside of the equation. By then, you need to start readying yourself, logistics, financials, and various other aspects relating to that. Not wait for accreditation. And that is why in the public domain, you'll see SAHUC puts out between 3, 4, 5 accreditation lists, because a lot of people fall, by the wayside. They can't afford it, or for whatever, logistical reasons, we now have to find others to fill. The problem we have with that is that the later you go into the accreditation process, the more difficult it is to fill the spaces. Because in the earlier period, an accredited operator may have booked a 5 or a 6 week package or a 4 week package. But now comes a time when that particular person has cancelled because they can't fulfill their financial obligations. To find somebody to fill a 5 or a 6 week package prior to the departures is a very difficult situation. And they can't change the operator because the operators are now locked in. They can't change the contract because the contract is locked in. So they have to slot into that particular contract, and it makes it even more difficult.
Would it be correct for me to say that all of the advertised prices that you're seeing, we see a 4 week package, 5 week, 6 week package, most of them exclude flights?
Yes, all of them.
All of them exclude all of them exclude flights, and all of them would exclude additional ziyarats. Some of them would include ziyarats. So over and above the advertised costs of operators, how much would people still need to budget for?
You made Hajj last year, Muhammad Ameen, and I think, you just look at the cost of sustenance. in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Back in the day, you could spend 10 or 15 riyals and you could get a meal for 3 people to share. Today, a meal would cost you no less than 25 to 30 riyals. Now, if you're doing that 3 times a day and you're going for a 6-week package, that's 42 days minus the 5 days of Hajj. It's 37 days that you need money for. So, you just got to work out that you're going to need maybe north of $1,000 a day. You're just for food.
Just for food.
When I made Hajj in 1997, a can of cold drink used to cost you 1 riyal. A can of cold drink today costs you 350 to 4 riyals. And that times 5 is a lot of money. Now, one needs to ask the question, is there a necessity to go for 6 weeks? Or is it, a culture? From a point of view of, my grandparents went for 6 weeks, I need to, think about it. But the reasoning behind the 6-week package is because there's 3 seasons in the kingdom. There's a low season, there's a shoulder season, and there's a peak season. So 6-week people going into Medina get the Medina accommodation at a very reasonable price. They then move to Makkah and they move to Azizia on the 25th of Zilqaidah. So all these equations and these processes contribute towards trying to keep the prices lower in order to help the pilgrim to make sure that the affordability is intact.
I know when I was there, right, I drink a lot of coffee. In South Africa, coffee is average. One of your chain stores will cost you about 20 rand a coffee. In Saudi Arabia, it's about 50 rand a coffee. So it's nearly 2.5 times the price. So in terms, let's say somebody wanted to do ziyarah. Most of the packages include your basic ziyarah to the famous sites. But what I noticed when I was there last year, something that many people overlook is that day of the 10th of Zulhijjah is very strenuous. You're doing Rami, you're then doing Tawaf Ziyarah, you have to make your way back to Azizia. Taxi prices are a lot. Over and above food, what would be some of the major costs?
It's very difficult because it varies. If you're in a group and you jump into a mini cab, for example, you could get away with something reasonable. But because of the 5 days of Hajj, unfortunately, the local Saudis take advantage of this. It's like, what we would call Christmas for them. A retailer would call it Christmas season. And these guys would just charge you anything from 100 riyals to 500 riyals to bring you from Makkah to Azizia. And that is a 25 riyal trip. Under normal circumstances. So these are the kinds of problems that you find. And more so with the middle-aged to elderly people and those that are infirm that would be fleeced in that particular way, unfortunately, as a result of them not being able to walk. A lot of the young people, opt, what, we've got the energy, we might as well take a walk and, take it in our stride and take our time. But all in all, Hajj is not becoming cheap anymore. Hajj has become an expensive entity, and it's unfortunate that we can't find mechanisms, to reduce the cost of Hajj. But what we need to do, and you guys as bankers, this is probably one of the purposes of this program, is to try and find ways to encourage people to save. Now, saving in South Africa, as we all know, is one of the lowest margins and percentages that we have in terms of that situation. But saving from a perspective of Shari'ah saving is something that needs to be educated to our Muslims in this country from a young age. I was very, very pleased the other day to have learned that a nursery school in Middelburg went through the process of application, accreditation, all of that, so that the kindergarten kids could learn about Hajj. But I think importantly, they need to learn about savings together with Hajj.
Absolutely. I did a calculation. If your average package is 150 and you budget another 50,000 for flights, food, transport, so call it 200,000 rand a person, a middle of the way package, times 2 people, that's 400,000 rand. And if your waiting list is, call it 8 years, you need to save at least 50,000 rand a year or 4,500 rand a month. And if you put that into context, that's like purchasing a car on HP or credit installment. So viewers, that's what the cost of Hajj is. To inculcate that is a savings cost of at least 4,500 rand a month in nominal terms. But maybe to end off, Uncle Shaheen, we were chatting off air on what Malaysia does. Maybe Share that with the viewers, so it can start instilling in them that this is actually something that you need to invest in.
I think the important thing is to understand the whole process of Hajj together with the financial aspects. Now, let's go back to 1965. Tabung Haji, which is the SAHUC equivalent in Malaysia, was formed at that time. And the primary objective behind why they were formed was so that they could find a way to ensure that people going on Hajj do not come back poverty-stricken. Prior to 65, Hujjaj would go, they'd go for 3 months, they'd sell their properties, they'd sell their farming lands, they'd get onto a boat and they'd go for 3 months and they'd go perform Hajj. When they came back, they were penniless. And as a result of that, they became a burden on the state. Now, because it's a majority Muslim country, the state had to now start looking after them. Together, the state put this whole process of Tabung Haji into place. But adjoining Tabung Haji was a bank called Bank Islam. And Bank Islam allowed the applicant, when they made the application, to open up a bank account. So there was a compulsory saving that needs to be done, and still continues to this day, that every pilgrim who makes an application must save. Only time that that pilgrim goes into the accreditation list is if he or she has sufficient funds, according to Tabung Haji, that will allow them to go for Hajj.
Okay.
And that then helps.
That is istita'ah.
Exactly, that's istita'ah. And that helps from a perspective of the management and the processes. So if you've got more money in there, it's not an issue. Tabung Haji actually has offices in the kingdom where they work according to your thumbprint, and if you need money to be drawn in the kingdom, they'll give you riyals there and they debit your account in ringgit in Malaysia. So there's a whole lot of processes that are involved. In 2015, we were guests of Tabung Haji, and they at that time informed us that they invested $15 billion worldwide. Property, various other investments, etc. They declared a $1 billion dividend to Hujjaj who had savings accounts with them. And as a result of that, it subsidizes the cost of Hajj. So if Hajj costs $5,000 in Malaysia, $1,500 would then be credited to the account, and the pilgrim's own money would then be reduced by $1,500.
No, you give me as a banker, obviously, you're giving me a good idea, inshallah, for us to, inshallah, we'll make the niyyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we start building towards that, so inshallah, we can help our Hujjaj. Uncle Shaheen, Jazakallah khair for joining us. It was lovely having a discussion with you, and inshallah, we hope it was valuable to our viewers and encouragement. One, register. The list is 8 to 10 years long, and in that time, inshallah, begin your savings journey towards Hajj, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.